She told me once, about 3 years before she got sick, that she'd found a place up near Tobermory where she could finally breathe. I didn't think much of it at the time. Margaret was always talking about wanting to get away from the city, away from the noise, away from all of it. 41 years of marriage, and I knew her patterns. She said things like that the way some people talk about winning the lottery as a pleasant thought, not a plan. I was wrong about that, as it turned out. I was wrong about a lot of things. I'm standing in my own kitchen, holding a mug of coffee that's gone cold, listening to my son talk about square footage. He has his phone out and he's showing his wife something on the screen and neither of them is looking at me. The funeral was 4 days ago. My wife of 41 years. 4 days. The detached garage alone adds significant value. My son Derek is saying to his wife, Pamela, and the lot is oversized for this neighborhood. If we list in spring, we're looking at strong numbers. I set the mug down. Derek. He looked up, not quite meeting my eyes. Dad, we've been over this. The house is too big for one person. It's a lot of upkeep. I've been managing this house for 27 years. You were managing it with Mom. He said it like that settled the matter. Like Margaret's absence had automatically transferred some authority over to him. Pamela was already walking through to the living room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors Margaret had refinished herself 12 years ago. She had a notepad. She was writing things down. I didn't say anything else that evening. I let them finish their coffee, and I walked them to the door, and I stood on the porch in the November cold, long after their car had disappeared around the corner. The maple in the front yard had already dropped its leaves. The street was quiet. Margaret had planted that maple 23 years ago, when it was barely a sapling, and I used to tease her that we'd never live to see it reach the eaves. It was well past the eaves now. I went inside and washed the mugs and went to bed. Her name was Margaret Ann Kowalski, and she was 63 years old when she died, and she was the most quietly capable person I have ever known. We met in 1982 at a mutual friend's dinner party in Kitchener, where I was working as a site supervisor for a construction company, and she was teaching grade 4 at the local public school. She had dark hair and a way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying actually mattered. I asked her to dance, even though there wasn't really dancing happening. She said yes anyway. We built everything together. The house in Oakville, the savings, the life. We had Derek in 1986, and my nephew's son, well, my late brother Frank's boy. Owen was born in 1989, and grew up in and out of our house after Frank passed. Margaret treated Owen like he was hers. She packed his lunches when his mother was working nights. She drove him to hockey practice. She showed up to his university graduation in Guelph, even though she was already tired in ways she wasn't fully admitting yet. Derek, our own son, had moved to Calgary in 2014 with Pamela. They came back for holidays and called on birthdays, and I know they loved their mother, in the way people love things from a distance. When Margaret got her diagnosis in 2021, they started calling more. When she declined faster than any of us expected, they started visiting more. After she passed, they stayed. That last part is where it started to go wrong. The week after the funeral, Pamela asked me if I had spoken to a financial advisor lately. I said I hadn't seen the need. She nodded slowly, the way you nod at someone who has just said something you find concerning. That same week, Derek asked me if I had considered simplifying his word, my arrangements. Simplifying. I was 67 years old, retired from construction management for 4 years, perfectly healthy, living in a paid-off 4-bedroom house in Oakville. I didn't know what there was to simplify. I learned quickly enough. Derek sat me down 10 days after Margaret's funeral and explained, with charts on his phone, that the house represented an underperforming asset. He said that for a man my age, living alone, maintaining a property this size was a liability. He said there were beautiful communities, he said, communities for active seniors, where I would have everything I needed in one place, and people my own age to spend time with. He mentioned one called Lakeview Pines, which he had apparently already researched, and he showed me photos of the lobby. I looked at the photos. I looked at my son. I'm not moving to a retirement community, I said. Dad, it's not. Derek, I'm 67. I just lost your mother. I'm not moving anywhere. He let it go. For about a week, Pamela came by on a Thursday when Derek was at a work meeting. She brought a casserole, which I appreciated, and then she asked if she could look at the upstairs bathroom because she'd noticed the grout looked like it might be going. I said, sure, go ahead. That seemed fine. Normal, even. I found out later from Owen, who had a habit of being around without anyone noticing, a useful quality that Pamela had taken photographs, not just of the bathroom, of the master bedroom closet, of the furnace room, of the backyard. Owen had seen her on the back deck with her phone, turning slowly, like she was doing a virtual tour. When I asked her about it, she said she was just trying to help me understand what deferred maintenance might look like to a future buyer. She used the phrase future buyer so naturally that I understood it had been in her vocabulary for some time. I started paying closer attention. Margaret and I had a joint account, which made sense for 41 years and made me vulnerable now. Derek's name was also on the account. As a secondary holder, we'd added him years ago, after Margaret's first health scare, when the doctors thought it might be her heart, and we wanted to make sure Derek could help manage bills if anything happened. The something happened, but not what we'd expected, and not then. The access remained. I noticed the first transfer in December, $3,000, moved from our joint account to an account I didn't recognize. I called the bank. The transaction had been authorized from an IP address in Calgary, Derek's address. I sat very still at my kitchen table for a long time. I called my brother Frank's boy, Owen, 29 years old, working as a paralegal in Hamilton, a solid and steady young man who would have made Frank proud, and I told him what I'd found. Owen went quiet in the way he does when he's thinking hard, and then he said, "How long do you want to wait before you do something?" I said, "Long enough to know how much." Over the next 6 weeks, I tracked it carefully. Small amounts, irregular intervals, always from the joint account. By mid-January, it had reached $67,000. He was being methodical about it, which told me he'd thought it through. There was also a conversation I overheard. I wasn't hiding. I was in the hallway. They simply didn't hear me come back inside where Pamela was on the phone, saying that once the house listed, the timeline takes care of itself. She didn't specify a timeline for what. I called my lawyer on a Tuesday morning. Her name is Barbara Finch, and I have worked with her since 2003, and she is not a warm woman, but she is exceptionally thorough. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I value about her. Then she said, "Harold, I think it's time you told me about the property your wife registered in her name in 2019. I was quiet for a moment. "Margaret told you about that?" "Margaret updated her estate planning with me in March of last year," Barbara said. "She was quite clear about what she wanted." "I assumed you knew the specifics." "I did, and I didn't." Margaret had mentioned the property to me, the place near Tobermory, on the Bruce Peninsula, that she had found on her own, using money from a small inheritance she'd received when her aunt passed in 2018. She had mentioned it the way she mentioned many things she'd done quietly and competently while I was looking elsewhere. "I found something," she'd said. "Something for later." I hadn't asked enough questions. I thought later meant something vague. I didn't understand she meant specifically this. The property was a 3-bedroom cedar log house on 4 acres of forested land, 8 minutes from the harbor in Tobermory, with a wood stove and a well and a screened porch facing north toward Georgian Bay. Margaret had bought it outright in September 2019 for $340,000 cash. From the inheritance, from savings she'd accumulated quietly in an account I didn't know the full details of. She had registered it solely in her name. In her estate, it passed solely to me. Derek was not mentioned. Barbara had helped Margaret draft everything. The will was airtight, the beneficiary designations on Margaret's life insurance substantial. Because I had insisted on it when we were young and she had agreed to maintain, it had been updated in March of the previous year. They named me as primary, and Owen as secondary. Derek was not named. Margaret had known something, not necessarily everything, not the scale of it, but she had known something about the direction of things. She had known her son well enough to plan around him. I sat with that for a long time. I still sit with it sometimes. It is one of the great acts of love I have ever been on the receiving end of, and I was not even aware it was happening. I did not tell Derek about any of this. What I did was call a locksmith on a Wednesday in January, while Derek and Pamela were at lunch with some friends of theirs in Mississauga. I had the locks changed, front door, back door, side entrance to the garage. I also contacted the bank and, with Barbara's help, formally removed Derek's access to the joint account. The remaining funds, less a reserve I kept for current expenses, were transferred to an account in my name only. Then I started packing. I didn't pack everything at once. I was methodical, the things that mattered most. Margaret's photographs, her books, the cedar box she kept on her dresser with the letters we wrote each other before email made letters obsolete. Those went first. Then my tools, my files, the practical things. I made arrangements with a moving company out of Owen's recommendation, a small company, reliable and discreet. Over 3 weekends, while Derek and Pamela believed I was thinking things over, I moved the better part of my life 4 hours north. The log house near Tobermory was empty when I first saw it, naturally, but Margaret had left a note tucked into the kitchen window frame, as if she had expected I might arrive alone. The note was 3 sentences. I won't write them here. They are mine. But I'll tell you that I sat on the screened porch for 2 hours after reading it, looking out at the gray February sky above the tree line, and I understood, for the first time in 3 months, that I was going to be all right. Derek called in late January to tell me he had spoken with a real estate agent and that they were thinking April would be the ideal listing window. He said this the way you tell someone about a plan you've already made, not a question, not a discussion, a report. April, I said. The spring market up here is strong. We could be looking at Derek. Who is the agent? There was a pause. Pamela's cousin. She has a strong track record in the West End. I see. And when were you planning to tell me the house was for sale? Dad. He had a way of saying Dad that contained a kind of tired impatience, as though I were the one being unreasonable. We've talked about this. You can't stay in that house indefinitely. It's just not practical. You're right, I said. I'm not in that house. Another pause. Longer this time. What do you mean? I mean I moved out 3 weeks ago. I've been in Tobermory since the 2nd week of January. Tobermory? What? Why would you go to Tobermory? Where are you staying? My house, I said. Your mother's house, which she left to me, which you were never going to inherit. The silence after that had a different quality. I could hear him breathing. What are you talking about? He said, and it wasn't quite a question. Margaret bought a property on the Bruce Peninsula in 2019. She left it to me in her will, the will that Barbara Finch helped her draft. The same Barbara Finch who has been my lawyer for over 20 years, and who has all the documentation you would need to understand that this is not a matter you have any standing in. You're telling me Mom bought a house and never told either of us? She told me, I said, which was almost entirely true. She didn't tell you because it wasn't yours to know about. Dad, he stopped. Started again. There's $67,000 missing from the joint account. I let the sentence sit there. Is there? I said. Dad. Derek? I have bank records, transaction logs, IP addresses, and a lawyer who has already drafted correspondence regarding unauthorized transfers from a joint account following the death of the primary account holder. I also have, if it comes to it, Pamela's voice on a phone call recorded on my own porch, discussing the timeline of a sale of a property she had no authority over. He didn't say anything. I don't want to use any of that, I said, and I meant it. I want you to understand that I know everything, and I want you to understand what your mother understood about you, and I want you to make a choice about what kind of person you're going to be going forward. But I need you to also understand that the house in Oakville is going to sell on my timeline, and the proceeds belong to me. And what your mother left behind belongs to me, and if I choose to give you anything at all, it will be a gift, not an obligation. The line was quiet long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. She knew, he said finally. His voice was different, smaller. Mom knew. Your mother knew you, I said. She loved you anyway. That was her business. What happens next is yours. I hung up. I went inside and put the kettle on. Owen came up that weekend. He arrived on a Saturday afternoon in his battered Civic, with a bag of groceries and no announcement, which is exactly his way. We walked the property together in the late afternoon light, through the white birches at the back of the lot, down toward the creek that runs along the eastern edge. The snow was still thick up there in February, and our boots punched through the crust with every step. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Better," I said. "Getting better." He nodded. We walked for a while without talking. Owen had Margaret's quality of being comfortable in silence, which I had always valued in her, and which I found unexpectedly moving in him. "She picked a good one," he said, looking out at the tree line. "She had good taste," I agreed. We went back, and I made dinner, and we sat by the wood stove and talked about Frank, which we hadn't done properly in years, and about Margaret, and about what I was planning to do with the property in the spring. I had a neighbor who ran a small outfitting operation, kayak rentals and guided hikes for tourists, and she had mentioned that the extra acreage might be useful to her. There were conversations to be had. There were things to build, or rebuild, or simply maintain. I had spent my career overseeing construction, and I understood the satisfaction of a thing that holds together over time. Barbara handled the Oakville house sale on my behalf that spring. It sold in April, as Derek had predicted, though not with Pamela's cousin. The numbers were what they were after 41 years. A paid-off home in Oakville is worth something substantial. I transferred $50,000 each to Derek and to Owen from the proceeds. Owen called me, startled. I told him it was what Margaret would have wanted, and I meant it. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said thank you in a way that told me he was crying, which is the kind of thing Frank would have done too. Derek called after he received the transfer. I'll say this for him. He didn't try to thank me in any way that suggested he thought he deserved it. He said he was sorry. He said it like he meant it, though I recognize that grief and guilt look similar in the short term, and that what they become, over time, depends on the person. I told him Tobermory was beautiful in July, if he ever wanted to come up. I told him his mother would have liked showing it to him. I left the rest unsaid. Some things a person has to figure out on their own, and there are limits to what a father can do. Pamela, I did not call. I had nothing to say to Pamela. I'm writing this on the screened porch, in the middle of August, with a coffee that is actually hot for once, because I have learned that I need to sit down before I pour it, and not after. The Georgian bay light in the morning has a quality I have not found anywhere else, something to do with the angle, and the water, and the birches catching it at the edge of the property. Margaret would have wanted to paint it, if she'd had more time. She had been taking watercolor lessons in the last years, something I teased her about gently, and she had gotten genuinely good at it. I have 4 of her small paintings hung in the hallway. I walk past them every morning. Owen is driving up next weekend with a friend of his, a young woman from Hamilton, who apparently works in environmental assessment and is interested in the property's creek ecosystem. I told him she was welcome to look at whatever she wanted. The more people who walk through these birches and understand what's here, the better. There's a town council meeting in September about a proposed development further up the peninsula, and the outfitter next door has asked if I want to come and speak. I was a construction man my whole life, which means I understand both what gets built and what gets lost in the building. I have something to say about that. I think I'll go. I still talk to Margaret sometimes. Not out loud, mostly, though occasionally on the long walks, when there's no one around, I'll say something. A comment about the light or the deer tracks in the mud or something I read in the paper that would have made her laugh. I don't think she can hear me. I'm not a man who holds strong opinions about what happens after, and I distrust certainty in both directions. But the practice of it helps me organize what I think, and I suspect that was always part of what she was for me. Not that she was a function. She was far more than that. But part of love, the daily working part, is that it helps you understand yourself. You get used to having a mirror that knows you well. When it's gone, you learn to hold still differently. The kettle is going inside. Another round of coffee, another hour of this clear August morning, and then I have fence line to check on the north side of the property where something has been getting into the compost. A good life, going forward, is not given to you. It's not inherited. It does not arrive because someone else failed to take it from you, though sometimes that is the beginning of the story. It arrives because you decide to build it, the same way you build anything worth having carefully, with attention to what's already there, with respect for the ground you're building on. Margaret knew that. She built things for 41 years, and then, when she knew she was running out of time, she built one more thing quietly, without asking anyone's permission, and she left it for me to find. I found it. I'm grateful every day that I did. I'm grateful that she trusted me to be the kind of person who would show up and do something useful with what she left behind. I think that trust, more than the land or the cedar house or any of it, is the thing I most want to be worthy of. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to inherit something from someone else. The ones who end up with something real are usually the ones who understood, somewhere along the way, that the building was always theirs to do.